Poland's Ministry of Foreign Affairs says in a statement that the plane carrying around 120 South Africans, including journalists, police and military security, for President Cyril Ramaphosa had what it calls dangerous goods on board. The ministry says the South African representatives do not have permission to bring the items into Poland. Warsaw says, in addition, there were people on board the aircraft that the Polish government had not been informed about beforehand. The ministry says it made every effort to properly prepare for President Cyril Ramaphosa's visit. And to discuss this a bit more further, we are now joined by Wits University Honorary International Relations Professor John Stremlau, and he joins us now via our Zoom link. Professor, thank you so much for joining us here on the late edition on SABC News. What do you make of the hostility that was met with journalists and President Cyril Ramaphosa's security personnel once he touched down in Warsaw?
Well, good evening, Mbali, and I'm glad that you asked that question with reference to hostility, because the Polish government is not giving the full story, in my view, but that's not unusual for foreign ministries, be it DERCO or the State Department or others. They find excuses. The fact of the matter is, Poland is a very strong supporter of Ukraine. I went to Poland in 1964 when it was under Soviet domination. I know from personal experience how much the Poles treasure their independence, and they see that the Ukrainians are fighting that war for all of them right now, and the Polish government is aiding Ukraine in a massive way, even beyond the $2 billion in military assistance, which for a small country is a lot. But they also host thousands and thousands of Ukrainian refugees. It takes 1% of their GDP, and they are the pass-through for everyone going to and from Ukraine. So they see South Africa as pro-Russia. I don't want to get into that debate, but that's the way that they perceive it. So I take this the detention of the airplane very much in that context.
And it brings me to this question around, one would say that in the beginning we're told that there was a bungling of paperwork by the South African delegation. But at the same time, one would ask, are there deeper tensions here? Specifically, coming to what you've just said, is the issue of South Africa taking a position of non-alignment. But some saying that, one would say with the history that South Africa and Russia has, South Africa has taken a side.
Well, that's the perception that the Poles have, and I know it's debated hotly here, and I don't want to get into that. I don't have to really get into that, but the perceptions matter. And in the view of the pro-Ukrainians, this is not the moment to talk about a meaningful peace process. Putin has taken a very hard line. Zelensky has taken a very hard line. There's a counteroffensive going on by the Ukrainians. We don't know what's going to happen over the next 3 or 4 months. This African initiative could be an important first step, but it's only a fact-finding mission. It cannot indeed be anything like a really true peace process, because the conflict is not ripe for that.
And, with the start of this visit and basically how it started in Poland, going on towards Ukraine, do you think that it has elements of being a success? If we've just seen the hostility towards President Cyril Ramaphosa?
Well, the hostility was the Poles. He and his delegation got a good reception in Kyiv, although there were missile attacks that were the Russians claimed were thrown up by the Ukrainians, but the Ukrainians and the West seemed fairly confident that they came from Russia. But in any case, they go on to St. Petersburg tomorrow. Cyril Ramaphosa will be back here on Sunday. So it's a quick visit, but it is probably useful to remind everyone that, I know it's useful to remind everyone that Africa is suffering huge collateral damage from this conflict in the terms of grain not being available, inflation problems that we confront down here, and fertilizer. So there are consequences of this terrible war, not to mention all the assistance that's going into Ukraine and will go into Ukraine to rebuild Ukraine if Ukraine is able to protect its sovereign equality and territorial integrity, or some sort of territorial integrity. And therefore, the sooner this conflict is over, the better. It just doesn't seem ripe for resolution at the moment.
Professor, what do you think we are not being told here? One would say that there's silence in the air somewhat, that there's a message that many people can pick up on, but nobody's actually coming out to say it. What do you make of the silence that's not being addressed with this whole Ukraine and Russia, and in particular, this visit by the AU?
Well, I'm reminded of a famous historian who said it's best to predict events after they happened, and you've had some historical record. And right now we're watching unfold a very real drama about the current world order. And, all we really have is sovereign equality and territorial integrity. That's the irony of the South Africans being accused of tilting toward the Russians for whatever reason, and we don't know the full story even of South African U.S. relations, or better yet, the ANC and Russia. So we'll have to wait and see, but nevertheless, this is an important story for all of us in a free society with a free press, and you don't have that in Russia. So tomorrow we'll only get what little the journalists and thank God for Detroit. He fed in to News 24 the detention of the airplane. I didn't even know about that until I saw his stories coming in this morning. So free press is really important for all of us.
And, when it comes to South Africa's stance and this non-alignment stance it has taken, what implications, does this have for the country?
Well, the controversy is whether or not South Africa is truly not aligned, and the plane landing, what the Americans think, and Ruben Brigady, our ambassador here, the American ambassador here, was very explicit about that, what the Lady R was up to in landing in Simonstown back in December. South Africa has a hard case to prove, and this trip is, in some ways, maybe to reassure the West that it is really, in fact, not aligned, because it is trying to see both sides and understand better the conflict, but also bring along Africans who have supported the UN resolutions that condemn Russian violation and invasion of independent, sovereign, and treaty-bound Ukraine, because there was a peace treaty between Ukraine and Russia that wasn't honored when the troops rushed in on February 24th.
And Professor, now that the AU delegation or the African leaders have now wrapped up their visit in Kyiv, what are your expectations from their meeting now with Russia?
Well, we'll have to hear from Cyril Ramaphosa when he returns on Sunday. I'm not sure that Putin is going to give them very much, because Putin is also taking a very hard line and has shown a willingness, and the Wagner Group has shown a willingness to really be brutal in killing civilians and bombing civilian areas and bombing this bridge that is putting 42,000 civilians at risk. This is a replay of the way the Russians handled the Syrian insurrection, and it is a tough world out there, and the Russians are among the toughest actors around, and so I'm not sure that there's going to be much satisfaction shown by either talking to Zelensky at this stage or Putin, because I return to where I began. This conflict is not ripe for resolution, peaceful resolution, which we all want and we all know is going to happen sometime, but it's not ripe yet.
Professor Stremlau, thank you so much for your time.